Alright, we're going to walk through the process that I use to load for my Savage Hog Hunter 308. In the previous video I showed you how I prepare the cases. In this video we're going to go through the loading process. I do mine one step at a time. I don't try to prime all the cases, then put in powder, then put in bullets, and then so forth. I do it one step at a time for each cartridge. That way there's no chance of getting two loads of powder into one case or anything like that. Most of these powders and charges you could not put more than one in a case, but just to be sure, I like to step through it. So the cases have been prepared, they're ready to go, they've been trimmed to length, the primer pocket's been uniformed and cleaned, case neck size has been turned down. Most of these steps are done once, but you have to trim to length after every firing because the case length does expand as you're firing. The brass forms within your chamber. So I like to cut to length every time. Now the first step is to prime it. I've got primers here. Put it into the press. Put the cartridge in the brass into the case holder. Raise it. Put the primer in place. Seat the primer. Now you can see here that the primer is below flush. It's seated well, and that case is ready to load with powder now. So set it here, put it in the funnel. I use the scoops, and one thing I want to point out, my scale is zeroed. I make sure that the poises are on 0. This particular scale has 3 different poises. They're on 0, and I'm balanced. I'm on 0. Now I'm going to set the poises for the load for my rifle. Now this is the load that I have tested. I worked up to this load. I did not start with this load. I started with a lower charge weight, and as I developed it and tested it, I worked it up to what this load is. You need to do the same. Don't assume that because this works in my gun that this will work in your gun. Even if you're shooting the same type gun, Savage Hog Hunter 308, Model 11, don't assume that this will work in your rifle. It may not. And bad things happen when you assume. I'd like for you to keep all your fingers. I'd like for you to keep your face, your eyes, because if you put too hot a load in your rifle, bad things can happen. I don't want that to happen to you. Please be careful. Do your reading, do your research, do your testing. Start with a lower load. Work up to the load that works the best in your gun. Don't assume it because it works in mine that it will work in yours. Enough said. Be careful out there. Have fun, but be careful. Now I've got it set for what I use, and I use scoops. I haven't shelled out the money for any big powder dump system or trickler. This works for me. I've tried the trickler, and I can do it. You know, I didn't have the electronic trickler. I haven't shelled out the cash or something like that. I enjoy doing it this way. It works for me. You know, this is as accurate as you can get. You know, I've got exactly the charge weight that I want. I can test it, just relieve it a little bit, put it back on the scale, see if it comes back to the same reading. Just double check that everything is working. If it comes back to the same reading, you're good to go. Alright, so put that into the case. Also, when you're using the funnel system like this, I have seen the powder get stuck in the bottom of the funnel. So make sure I give it a few taps, or I visually check it to make sure the powder's out of the funnel, because if you remove the funnel and the powder is not fully in the case, powder goes everywhere. And ask me how I know. Done it more than once. So just be careful, make sure it's in there. Now, ready to seat the bullet. I'm currently using Sierra Match King 175 grain. The rifle seems to like it. I set it in the case, try to keep it as vertical and concentric as I can to start it with. Some people think that you know, the straighter you start it, the better it is. Take it over to the press. I've already got it set to the length for my rifle. Your rifle may be different, but I'm going to show you what I do. I seat it, then I put a light crimp on it. I'll crimp it once, lower it, turn it 90 degrees, crimp it again. That way I got a good concentric crimp. I'm going to check my length here with my dial micrometer. I use, I measure off the ogive. I don't measure off the overall length. So I've got this little adapter here that's made for a 30 caliber that gives me consistent length, because ogive that it measures to, this is what hits the lands first. This taper here, right down in this area here, this is what hits the lands, and this is what I measure how far I am off the lands. My particular rifle seems to like 20 thousandths off the land, so that's what I'm measuring. You need to measure and see what your rifle likes, but don't go by my settings, because even if you've got the same rifle, it may, the distance to your lands may be different. Now here I am at 2.255. This is what works in my gun. Again, check what your gun likes. Check your chamber length, your seating depth, and be sure that you're not loading it too long. If you load it too long, you get an overpressure situation, and overpressure again leads to losing these or worse. So be careful. Don't assume my settings will work in your gun. You might notice I'm saying that more than once, trying to get the point across. Don't go by anybody else's measurements, even though it may be the same gun, even though it may have consecutive serial numbers. It doesn't mean that everything is the same. So be careful, do your own measurements, work up your own loads. Don't rely on anybody else's load data. You don't know how accurate they are, and also just the differences between batches of powder, differences between primers, case capacities. It all affects the pressures, and you don't want to get into an overpressure situation. But here we are, we've got a loaded cartridge, and what you want to go for is consistency. Consistency will bring accuracy. If you find a load that your gun likes, you want to consistently reproduce that load. And that's what I go for. I don't go for speed. I'm not into mass production here. I want to make sure that each cartridge is as close as possible to the next cartridge. Consistency is key. Maximum velocity is not the key. You want to find the accuracy node that works in your gun, and it may be close to maximum powder load. It may be close to the maximum velocity for your gun, but it may be several hundred feet per second slower than maximum velocity for your gun. But that's what we go for. Accuracy, that's what I go for. Others may differ with that opinion. Again, that's my opinion. Do what works for you, but do your research. Be safe, be careful, enjoy it, shoot often. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, tell your friends.